There is a lie that holds up the lives of most men, and no one dares to name it. The lie is simple, and because it is simple, it goes unnoticed for decades. The lie that greatness must be built outward, stacked up like goods on a shelf, confirmed by witnesses, recorded in diplomas and titles. You are greater than what you have accumulated, and when you finally stop carrying what you do not need, you will discover what you have always been. Just begin to let go and keep letting go, even when you find 1,000 reasons to keep holding on. Keep letting go, and greatness will appear. I know it sounds impossible right now, but it will happen. I wanted to talk about how uncomfortable the journey from attachment to detachment can be, because we romanticize this idea of greatness as if it had a certain size, as if it came with a certain biography, with visible signs of success, as if greatness was something built outward, when in truth it is something discovered inward. The journey from attachment to detachment is genuinely striking, and the process is very different for each person who walks through it. It is an almost endless journey, something that has to be cultivated constantly, like a muscle that few people train. Training that muscle is not always pleasant. It can be painful and deeply unsettling, especially when what you need to release has been for decades what you considered to be yourself. I have seen men move from a lifetime of accumulation to a state of lightness that seemed impossible. And of course, this work continues every single day. But they freed themselves and discovered, with some astonishment, the opposite of what they expected. Things that once seemed essential now feel heavy, and what once seemed empty now holds them up. 700 years ago, Eckhart saw exactly this moment of life and wrote about it with a precision that still disarms anyone who has the courage to listen. Eckhart of Hochheim, known as Meister Eckhart, was a Dominican friar born around 1260 in the region of Thuringia, in the heart of what is now Germany. He was a professor in Paris, holding the same chair that centuries earlier had belonged to Thomas Aquinas, and later a preacher in Strasbourg and Cologne. He spent time with princes and peasants, with university scholars and the illiterate, with cloistered nuns and market vendors. His message, though dressed in the religious language of his time, was meant for everyone, and that is why it outlived him. His writings were considered too radical for the era he lived in. The church of his century could not bear the depth of what he was saying. But what was too radical for the 14th century is, perhaps, exactly the medicine that the 21st century needs. Before going further, we need to clear up a misunderstanding about the word greatness. In modern vocabulary, greatness has become attached to size, fame, power, superiority over others. Eckhart is not talking about that kind of greatness. The greatness he describes is something else, and something older. It is wholeness, not size. It is the alignment between what a man is on the inside and what he has always been, before any mask. It is the ground that does not shake when everything else is shaking. It is the presence that does not need to be announced to be felt. It is not what you achieve. It is what remains when everything you have achieved has been taken away. Anyone who has never met someone with this quality may have trouble imagining it, but anyone who has met such a person, even once in a lifetime, never forgets. There is a different weight to that kind of man, a weight that does not come from what he has accumulated, but from what he has let go. Greatness for Eckhart is not size, it is truth. 7 centuries later, someone still hears this and shudders. Eckhart wrote for the man who has already lived a great deal, though he never used those words. He wrote for the one who has already followed the script. Education, work, marriage, children, achievements, recognition. For the one who did everything that was expected of him and discovered, to his surprise, that it was not enough. Most people fight against this discovery their whole lives. They try one more title, one more trip, one more relationship, one more project. They try to revive an enthusiasm that no longer answers. Eckhart offers another possibility. The problem is not lack, it is excess. Modern man is not empty, but rather too full to feel what lives inside him. Eckhart's central thesis, the one that holds up the rest of his work, appears in Sermon 48 and at various points throughout his German writings. He claims that within the depths of every human being, there is something he calls Seelenfünklein, which can be translated as the spark of the soul. This spark, he says, was not created. It does not belong to time or to the material world. It was not built by your parents, your education, or your choices. It simply is, and always has been, and will be there when everything else has passed. This luminous core is your true greatness, not the greatness you try to achieve, nor the greatness others recognize in you. The original greatness, prior to everything, requiring no witnesses and no proof. Here is the turn that changes everything. The greatness Eckhart describes is not something to be earned. It is something to be discovered. It does not lie ahead in the future, depending on one more effort. It lies beneath your feet, right now, buried. And this detail changes the entire direction of a life. The man who believes that greatness must be built spends decades stacking stones upon stones. And the more he stacks, the further he gets from what he always had. The man who understands Eckhart's thesis does the opposite. He begins to remove. He begins to dig. He discovers, with some astonishment, that beneath all that construction, there was a whole light, waiting. But if this silent root exists in every man, why do so few perceive it? Eckhart answers with an image that has to be understood carefully. The soul, he says, is covered in sediment. Each layer is a form of attachment. Each attachment is a way the soul identifies itself with something it is not. A man identifies with the position he holds, and that identification becomes a crust. He identifies with the opinion he has about politics, and another crust forms there. He identifies with the old grudge he carries against a brother, a business partner, an old love, and another veil accumulates. He identifies with the fear of growing old, with the desire to be admired, with the need to be right. Each of these identifications is a weight on top of the spark. The longer a man has lived, the more weight he has piled on. And the paradox is that what seemed to be the construction of identity was, in truth, the burying of the true identity. Modern man may be the most heavily covered in all of history. Not for the old reasons, but for new ones. The blue light from the phone on his face before sleep is one layer. The bill that lands in his inbox at 6 in the morning is another. The notification that interrupts dinner adds one more. The dozens of opinions absorbed each day without anyone asking pile up in silence. The quiet calculation of how he measures up against the college classmates who show up on social media is a thick weight, one almost no one escapes. The man of the 21st century carries more noise before breakfast than a 13th century peasant carried in an entire year. And among all the modern coverings, there is one that operates quietly under the surface, and for that reason is the hardest to remove. Comparison with others. You open your phone, and within minutes, you see the college classmate who sold his company, the old business partner who built the fortune you did not build, the brother who seems to live in another reality, the neighbor who aged better. And in each of these images, without realizing it, you measure yourself, you calculate, you subtract, and you diminish yourself without making a sound. Comparison has a cruel feature. It is always vertical, always upward, and always unfair. You compare the worst of yourself with the best the other person chose to show. Eckhart would not have used these words, but he would say the same thing in a different vocabulary. He would say that the man who measures himself by others has already handed over his spark. He has already outsourced the yardstick of his own life, and a yardstick held in someone else's hand will never measure what you are on the inside. It will only measure how much you are not yet what they appear to be. That calculation is endless, and it never ends in peace. Greatness is not measured, it is allowed. 7 centuries later, someone still hears the name Eckhart gave to the way out and finds the sound strange. In Middle High German, he wrote it as Abgeschiedenheit. In English, the closest translation is detachment or releasement, though neither word fully captures what he meant. In the treatise known as von Abgeschiedenheit on detachment, Eckhart makes a statement that was probably one of the things that most disturbed the theologians of his era. He says that detachment is superior to humility, to mercy, and even to love. Not because those virtues are small, but because detachment is the root that makes them all possible. Without detachment, humility becomes performance. Without detachment, love becomes mutual dependence in disguise. Detachment is the silent soil where everything noble can grow. The name he gave to this was strange even in his own century. And stranger still, perhaps, is the misunderstanding many people make before they even begin to grasp it. Detachment, for Eckhart, is not abandoning the world. It is not running from your family, nor is it the theatrical gesture of someone who drops out of life and disappears. Eckhart was an urban preacher. He lived in busy cities. He spoke with people from every class. He wrote in noisy environments. The detachment he taught was inward. It was a state of the soul that remains still while everything around it moves. You can have possessions and be detached. You can love deeply and be detached. Detachment is not what you do with your hands. It is what you do with the inner place where you decide who you are. Thomas Aquinas, who belonged to the same Dominican order and was required reading in Eckhart's training, taught that virtue is the middle between two extremes. Eckhart goes further. He claims there is a virtue that lies above the middle because it does not choose between extremes. It remains in the absolute center, in the depths of the soul, where no extreme reaches. This center is what he calls in some sermons Seelengrund, the ground of the soul. There, he says, there is no agitation. There, the soul is free. And it is from this ground that all true action is born. The detached man does not act out of fear or desire. He acts from the ground. And the man who acts that way has a strength that no one can take from him. The oldest mistake of human life is believing that greatness comes from the outside. We were taught this from an early age. Schools reward those who stand out. Families value those who climb. Cities celebrate the people who appear on the lists of the most successful. Obituaries measure a life by the positions held, the awards received, the institutions founded. And so we grow up with the silent conviction that to be great is to be seen as great. Eckhart inverts this logic in a way that few people in history have had the courage to do. He says, in plain words, that everything you achieve can be lost, and everything that can be lost was never truly yours. The greatness that comes from the outside is fragile. It depends on witnesses. It has to be renewed every cycle, every election, every quarterly report. It is a greatness that must be constantly fed, like a fire with no wood of its own. But there is something Eckhart knew, and we will get to it. Before that, it is worth seeing in the flesh what this fragility means. Imagine two men of the same age, both close to 65, both reaching the end of successful careers in a major American city. The first built his identity entirely on the title he held for decades. When the business card said Chief Executive, he felt whole. The house, the car, the reserved table at the restaurant, the calls answered on the second ring. All of it confirmed, every day, that he was someone. On the day he retired, the title was taken away. The business card no longer made sense. The calls stopped being returned with the same speed. Within a few months, this man entered a state that American geriatricians describe with growing frequency, and that researchers studying the retirement transition describe as a kind of identity loss, an emptiness that appears when the social role is removed. It was not clinical depression in the strict sense. It was something prior to that. It was the late discovery that he had built an entire life on a foundation that did not belong to him. No one had told him that. The second man had the same trajectory, the same title, the same salary, the same routine. But at some point, perhaps at 50, perhaps before, he began to notice that what he was not what appeared on the business card. He kept doing his work well. He kept being respected. But internally, he started loosening his grip. He started understanding that the title was a role, not his essence. When retirement came, the title was gone, but he remained. Mornings still had meaning. Conversations were still real. His presence at family gatherings, in the neighborhood, with the grandchildren, even gained a new quality, firmer, because it no longer depended on a professional schedule to feel alive. This second man understood Eckhart without ever having read Eckhart. He understood that his greatness was in a place his job could never touch. These two examples are not exceptions. They are two possible trajectories for any man who reaches the second half of life, having invested the first in some kind of career or social function. The difference between them is not talent and not even luck. It is the ability to have noticed, at some point, that identifying with the role was fragile, and to have begun, while there was still time, the work of discovering what lay underneath. Eckhart wrote for the second type, but he also wrote for the first, in the hope that they might turn the key in time. In Sermon 52, Eckhart offers one of the most discussed and debated passages in all of Western mysticism. He gives a radical reading of the Gospel Beatitude that says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." The question he asks is direct. What does it mean to be poor in spirit? And the answer he gives may still throw any reader off balance today. To be poor in spirit, Eckhart says, is to want nothing, to know nothing, and to possess nothing, not as an ascetic demand, not as mortification, but as a condition of absolute freedom. And he develops each of these three dimensions with a precision that still strikes us 7 centuries later. To want nothing does not mean to have no desires. Eckhart was a realistic man. He knew that a living human being desires, and that without desire, there is no action, no creation, no care. What he proposes is something else. He proposes not being a slave to what one desires. The ordinary man lives pushed from one desire to the next, like a weightless leaf. He wants a position, and when he has it, he wants a bigger one. He wants approval, and when he gets it, he wants more approval. He wants peace, and when he reaches it, he gets bored and creates conflicts to feel alive. The life of the ordinary man is a chase after objects that constantly change shape, and that never satisfy because they were never the point. To want without being dragged by the wanting is the first freedom. For the mature man, this lesson carries a particular weight. There are things he has wanted his entire life that may never come to pass. There are recognitions he hoped for that never arrived. There are amends he wanted from people who have already died, or who will never have the maturity to offer them. Holding on to those desires is one of the most subtle forms of suffering in the second half of life. Eckhart offers another path. He does not say to stop desiring. He says to stop letting desire be your owner. When that happens, something curious occurs. The desire continues, but it loses the power to poison. You would still like that recognition, but your peace no longer depends on it. And that small difference is, in practice, an infinite difference. It is the difference between living pulled and living whole. There is a simple test that any viewer can do while listening to these words. Think of one thing you want today, an outcome, a response from someone, a change in a situation that bothers you. Now ask yourself, if this does not happen, who will I be? If your answer is that you feel diminished or less real, then that desire is owning you, even if you have never noticed. Eckhart would say there is a crust over the spark there, and that the work is not to remove the desire, but to remove the identification with it. You are not what you want. You are what is there before any wanting. There is a recurring pattern that shows up in the lives of men who reach maturity, carrying many unfulfilled desires. They begin to resent the present in the name of a future that will never come. They talk often about what could have been. They talk about the company they almost started. They talk about the book they always wanted to write. They talk about the recognition that others, less talented, received. And in that repeated talking, without realizing it, they consume the little they still have. The energy that could be used to live what still exists is spent grieving what never came. Eckhart would call this a subtle form of imprisonment. The prison is not the desire itself, it is the bond with the desire. It is the refusal to let go of something that has already passed. And that refusal, day after day, narrows the present. Life collects its dues. Letting go is not giving up. That confusion has to be cleared up. The man who releases an old desire is not accepting that he was incapable. He is not surrendering to a smaller fate. He is, on the contrary, making a gesture of courage that few people have. He is recognizing that real life is the life happening right now, and that living it fully is more important than staying loyal to an imaginary version of himself. This is one of Eckhart's hardest lessons. He is not asking you to forget who you wanted to be. He is asking you to stop being beaten up by that image every single day. There is a huge difference between remembering and being dragged by the memory. The detached man remembers without being pulled. The attached man is pulled even when he is not consciously remembering. The second renunciation Eckhart describes is perhaps even more difficult for those who have lived a long time. To know nothing. Years of life accumulate not only experience, but certainties. The mature man has opinions about almost everything, and those opinions are no longer fresh. They are crystallizations, points of view he has defended so many times that he can no longer tell them apart from himself. He has a theory about how his children should have lived. He has a theory about what is wrong with the younger generation, and he goes around defending these theories even when no one is attacking. Eckhart is unsparing here. He claims that these certainties, though they feel like wisdom, are in truth disguised prisons. There is a moment in the empty kitchen at 5 in the morning, with the smell of fresh coffee rising from the filter, when those certainties begin to feel too heavy for the hour. It is as if the early light of day reveals, without asking permission, how much old opinion was being carried for no reason. That moment is rare, but when it comes, it is not forgotten. Understanding philosophy is interesting. Practicing philosophy can change your life. Start with the link I left in the first pinned comment. The spiritually poor man, in the Eckhartian sense, is not the ignorant one. He is not the one who did not study, did not think, did not live. He is something rarer and higher. He is the one who studied, thought, and lived, and still had the courage to loosen his grip on his own conclusions. The one who can say, in the middle of a conversation, "I do not know," without it feeling like humiliation. The one who can change his mind without feeling that he is losing ground. The one who can listen to a 20-year-old without the automatic filter of the veteran who has seen it all. That man is open, and that openness, according to Eckhart, is what allows something new to enter. What is full does not receive. What is empty is where the light comes in. Modern psychologists have described a phenomenon the mystics already knew. The man who grows old without releasing his certainties tends to become more and more rigid. He defends the same positions with greater intensity, listens less, judges more quickly. The world to him keeps getting worse, because the world keeps changing, and he does not. The man who grows old letting go, as Eckhart suggested, becomes lighter. He listens with more patience. He is surprised more easily. He finds delight in small things. The difference between these two ways of aging is, at bottom, the difference between the man who covered himself up and the man who uncovered himself. And that difference is visible in the face, in the posture, in the presence each one carries into a room. There is a remark attributed to the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, who devoted the final years of his work specifically to studying the second half of life, and it goes something like this. What is not brought to consciousness shows up in our lives as fate. In other words, the coverings we do not dare look at, the certainties we do not examine, the attachments we do not acknowledge, come back disguised as events. They come back as conflicts with children that replay what was never resolved with our parents. They come back as illnesses that appear in moments of unspoken emotional pressure. They come back as repetitions, similar marriages, similar fights, similar disappointments. Eckhart, 7 centuries before Jung, was saying something pointing in the same direction. The soul that does not empty itself carries outward what it could not look at within, and life, in its cruel patience, returns the same questions until they are, finally, faced. For the mature man, there is an implicit invitation in these observations. The invitation is to revisit your oldest certainties, not to destroy them, but to examine them with clear eyes. That opinion about how your children should have done things, is it really true? Or is it just a crystallization from a moment long past? That resentment from a professional betrayal, 20 years old, Does it still deserve the space it occupies today? That certainty that you know how the world works. Is it the fruit of a life, or just a mental shortcut so you do not have to think again? Eckhart would suggest that each of these questions, asked honestly, opens a small crack, and that through those cracks, over time, light comes in. The third renunciation is the most radical, and Eckhart knew it: to possess nothing, not in the sense of having no belongings. Eckhart was not asking anyone to sell the house or abandon the family. He was talking about something much deeper. He was talking about not even possessing yourself. And here many readers pull back, because the invitation seems impossible. What do you mean, not possess yourself? What is left then? Eckhart's answer is that what is left is exactly what was always there, before the possessing. What is left is the ember. What is left is the ground of the soul. What is left is what you are, before any construction. The self you defend, the self you present on social media, the self you describe when someone asks about you, is a construction. Useful perhaps, but still a construction. And as long as you confuse that construction with yourself, the untouched point stays covered. For the mature man, this is the most painful part of the lesson. He spent his life building that identity. He knows who he is. He has a coherent narrative about himself. He tells the story of his life with a beginning, a middle, and a direction. Eckhart suggests, without asking permission, that all of it can be released. Not destroyed, released. The difference matters. You do not need to erase your story to understand Eckhart. You only need to notice that you are not the story. That there is, beneath the story, someone who was there before any page was written. And it is with that someone that real life begins, even if it only begins at 60, at 70, at 80. And what comes next may be the hardest part to accept. Henry David Thoreau, writing in Walden in the 19th century, describes how he decided, for 2 years, to live in a cabin by a pond in Massachusetts, with the fewest possible belongings and obligations. We already have more videos on his story here on the channel. His intention, he himself states, was to live deliberately, to face only the essential facts of life and see if he could learn what it had to teach, so he would not discover at the moment of dying that he had not lived. Thoreau did not know Eckhart, but he was making, in his American way, the same move. He was peeling off coverings to find the ground. The difference is that Thoreau had to go to the woods to do it. Eckhart insists that the woods can be inside, that you do not need to move. You need to stop identifying with what you have accumulated. The interior woods is the silent cell, and anyone can build it, in any city, in any apartment. Something extraordinary appears when this work of stripping away begins to happen. Eckhart describes, in Sermon 2, what he calls the birth of God in the soul. For the secular listener, this image needs to be translated without losing its depth. What Eckhart is saying is that when the soul empties itself of its coverings, something is born in it that is not its own construction. Clarity arises where there was confusion. Peace arises where there was anxiety. A strength appears that did not come from effort, but from emptiness. It is as if the soul, by ceasing to manufacture itself, finally discovers what it is. And what it discovers is greater than it would have dared to imagine. This is the point where Eckhart's central thesis is confirmed by experience. Greatness was not built. It appeared when the building stopped. The mystics of the East described similar experiences in different words. The Roman Stoics spoke of something close to this in their own register. But Eckhart has a particular note. He insists this is not rare, not the privilege of monks, not a special gift. It is the natural destiny of any soul that allows itself to be stripped. What keeps most people from ever getting there is not lack of capacity. It is excess of clinging. Man holds on too tightly, and because he holds on too tightly, he never lets go enough for the birth to happen. The good news, the part Eckhart insists on, is that this birth can happen at any moment, at any age, in any circumstance. All it takes is for the ground to be ready. In Sermon 6, Eckhart introduces one of his most beautiful formulations. He speaks of the just man, and he defines the just man in a way that breaks with all utilitarian morality. The just man, he says, acts without why, ohne warum, in German. He does what is just because it is just, not because he will receive something in return. He loves because he loves, not in order to be loved back. He does his work well because the work deserves to be done well, not because someone is going to praise him. Eckhart is pointing to a deep layer of human experience. Most of our actions are self-interested, even the ones that look noble. We give to charity to feel like good people. We take care of our parents to avoid guilt. We donate to an institution so our name will appear. All of that may be good, but none of it is free. Freedom, according to Eckhart, begins when the why disappears. You take care of someone because they need it, period. No calculation, no expectation, no social media post to show you are a good person. You do your work well because the work is yours, and your work deserves your best, even if no one sees. You love a person for who they are, not for the role they play in your story. This way of living, ohne warum, is the most visible mark of someone who has detached. People recognize it, even when they cannot put it into words. The presence of someone who acts without why is different, steadier, cleaner, more respected, even if silently. The man who acts without why does not need to convince anyone. He simply is, and that is enough. He simply was. Life demands detachment from a man, whether he wants it or not, especially in the second half. The losses come in series. Parents grow old and pass away. Friends from his youth begin to get sick. Capacities that were once taken for granted start to falter. Dreams that seemed only delayed reveal themselves, suddenly, to be unreachable. Children grow up and choose their own paths, some of them painful. The body reminds him, with small warnings, that it is mortal. For the man who accumulated too much, each of these losses is a partial collapse. For the man who learned to let go, each one is a confirmation. Eckhart wrote, near the end of his life, a small treatise known as the Book of Divine Consolation, probably addressed to Agnes of Hungary, the widowed queen who was in mourning. In that work, he offers one of the most mature views ever written on suffering. Peace, he said, does not lie in avoiding loss. There is no human life without loss. Peace lies in being so inwardly free that loss, when it comes, finds someone who can feel it without being shattered by it. The detached man suffers. Eckhart is clear about this. He is not proposing an anesthetic. He is proposing depth. The detached man feels the pain, but the pain does not destroy his ground. There is something in him that remains intact, even in the middle of apparent collapse. And it is from that intact something that he consoles others, without empty words, only with presence. Anyone who has met someone like that, in the middle of a tragedy, knows the difference. It is the kind of presence that heals without promising anything. Eckhart wrote to Agnes of Hungary precisely at a time when she was in deep mourning, marked by a series of family tragedies, including the murder of her father. He did not offer words of pity or empty religious formulas. He offered a philosophical view of suffering that even today is one of the few that can stand up against real pain. He claimed, in essence, that suffering reveals where the attachment is. Each pain shows a bond that has not yet been released, not in the sense of blaming the one who suffers, as if he should have let go sooner, but in the sense that pain is information. It is the soul indicating, in its direct language, where there is still work to be done. The man who listens to that information, instead of running from it, turns loss into maturity. Eckhart is not saying that you should be grateful for the loss, nor is he proposing forced optimism. He is pointing to something more serious. He is saying that pain can be looked at directly, without being prettified and without being disguised, and still be carried with dignity. That dignity does not come from the absence of feeling. It comes from the inner steadiness that survives the feeling. The man who understood Eckhart cries when he needs to cry and is devastated when devastation comes. But somewhere, beneath all of it, there is a ground that does not shake. And it is on that ground that the soul stands to walk through what has to be walked through. There is a detail of modern life that makes detachment even more necessary, and at the same time, even harder. Noise. Eckhart lived in a medieval city, with bells, markets, noisy streets. But what he called noise was something inward. It was the agitation of the mind that does not stop. Today, that noise has been externalized, multiplied, and pumped directly into our hands, 24 hours a day. Before you even open your eyes in the morning, the phone has already delivered 30 news items, 15 opinions, 10 new worries. The spark of the soul cannot speak over that. It stays muffled. It waits. Eckhart insisted that a man has to create within himself what he called a silent cell, a space of inner retreat. Without it, life happens with no one home. The weight of the phone in the hand before you check it again for the 30th time in a day is a weight no previous generation knew. It is light on the arm, but heavy somewhere else. And it is precisely in that somewhere else that the original light is waiting, in silence, to be found again. For the mature viewer, there is good news hidden in this demand. The second half of life naturally offers more opportunities for silence. There are fewer small children running through the house. There are, perhaps, fewer professional commitments stacked up. There are calmer mornings, longer afternoons, evenings when time seems to move more slowly. The problem is that many men fill that space with more noise, more news, more television, more social media, more outside opinions coming in through the phone window. Eckhart would suggest the opposite. He would suggest that this space be recognized as a gift. That part of the work of aging well is voluntarily reducing the noise that once seemed essential. It is not about living in isolation. It is about creating pauses, about choosing silence instead of reaching for one more stimulus, about letting the ember finally have the time to appear. There is a rare silence in the modern world, the silence between two cars stopped at a traffic light in the middle of the afternoon, when for some reason neither one has the radio on. That silence lasts 5, 6 seconds, and almost no one notices it. But it is there, and inside it there is also a small opening. Eckhart would say that it is in those small openings that the spark announces itself, without making any noise, without demanding attention, simply being there. A curious observation that appears across many contemplative traditions, and that Eckhart would surely endorse. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something the sound was hiding. When a person begins to practice short daily periods of silence, they quickly notice that the initial discomfort does not come from the lack of noise. It comes from the revelation of what was underneath the noise. Repetitive thoughts, old anxieties, memories we avoid, decisions we put off. All of that surfaces when the noise stops, and that is why so many people run back to stimulation. It is easier to turn the television on than to face what silence shows. Eckhart understood that discomfort. That is why he spoke of patience. Silence has to be cultivated slowly, the way you cultivate a delicate plant, a little bit each day. No rush, no expectation of results. There is one more aspect of modern noise that deserves attention. It is not just the volume, it is the speed. Notifications come in short bursts. Videos last 30 seconds. Headlines change every hour. Other people's opinions arrive in waves. Everything conspires to keep attention in fragments. Eckhart, even in the 14th century, warned against scattering. He said the gathered soul is stronger than the scattered soul. Today, technology seems designed to scatter. And the mature man, raised in a slower time, has a secret advantage here. He remembers what it was like to read a book from beginning to end without interruption. He remembers what it was like to have a 2-hour conversation with no phones buzzing. He remembers what it was like to be bored and to discover in the boredom something interesting. That memory of another rhythm is an inheritance, and it can be brought back to life now, deliberately, as a practice of detachment from excess. There is a misunderstanding about detachment that has to be cleared up before the path gets confused with its opposite. Many people confuse detachment with indifference. They imagine the detached man as someone cold, distant, who refuse to feel in order not to suffer. Eckhart would be horrified by that interpretation. For him, the detached man is the exact opposite of the indifferent one. He is the one who loves more deeply, precisely because he is not clinging to what he gets back. He is the one who cares more wholly, precisely because he is not using care as currency. He is the one who gives himself more clearly, because he is not afraid of not being met halfway. The detached man does not have a closed heart. He has a heart that is open and steady at the same time. He feels everything, but he does not break under everything. Detachment does not chill life. The practical difference shows up in relationships. The clinging man uses people to fill his own emptiness. He needs his son to be successful in order to feel like a good father. He needs his wife to always be cheerful in order to feel like a good husband. He needs his friends to confirm his opinions in order to feel validated. Each relationship becomes, without his noticing, a way of looking for himself in others. The detached man does the opposite. He offers real presence with no conditions. He does not use his son as a personal project. He does not use his friends as an audience. And, ironically, it is in this way that relationships become deeper. People feel when someone is not grasping, and when they feel that, they lower their guard. Many men discover when their children are already adults that the relationship they built with them was marked by silent expectations. The son did not choose the profession the father expected. He did not marry the person the father imagined. He does not live nearby, or visit as often as the father had hoped. And there, in the place where there had been love, a subtle resentment, rarely named, begins to appear. Eckhart, even though he was not a biological father, understood this phenomenon. He would say that love contaminated by expectation was not yet true love. It was investment in disguise. True love, which he described as detached love, loves the son who exists, not the son one wished existed. And the mature man who makes that transition, while he is still alive, recovers a relationship that seemed lost. Not because the son changed, but because he, the father, stopped demanding a different son than the one he has. There is a final detail that changes everything, and I will return to it in a few minutes. First, we need to understand the philosophical turn Eckhart proposes. It can be summed up in a single word: subtraction. Our whole lives we have been taught to add. Add knowledge and add possessions. Add experiences and add contacts. Add achievements and stories to tell. And that logic worked, in part, during the first half of life. But there comes a moment when adding stops producing meaning and starts producing exhaustion. It is like trying to fill a glass that is already full. The liquid spills over, and yet we keep pouring, not realizing that the problem is not lack of liquid, it is excess. Eckhart proposes another movement: subtraction. Subtract unnecessary desires and automatic opinions. Subtract tired identities and old resentments. Subtract ambitions that no longer make sense, and even aspects of yourself that no longer serve you. Greatness, he concludes, is not the result of an addition. It is what appears when the subtraction is finished. It is like a sculpture that was already inside the block of stone, just waiting for the sculptor to remove what was extra. Michelangelo, centuries later, would describe his work in exactly those terms: not creating, but freeing. The sculpture was already there. He was just removing what covered it. Eckhart would make the same comparison about the human soul. You do not need to manufacture yourself. You need to be freed from what you have accumulated. And that liberation is not a single gesture. It is a patient, daily, silent process. It is work that lasts years and probably never fully ends, but that begins to bear fruit from the very first stone removed. There is a line from the Tao Te Ching, written by Lao Tzu in ancient China, that seems to speak directly with Eckhart, even though the two men are separated by more than 1700 years and by radically different cultures. Lao Tzu said that on the path of learning, every day something is added. On the path of the Tao, every day something is released. Eckhart would sign on without hesitation. There is a knowledge that is built by addition, and there is another that is discovered by removal. The first half of life is the time for addition. The second half, if it is well lived, is the time for removal. Confusing the two times is one of the deepest sources of frustration in maturity. Continuing to add after 50, after 60, after 70 is like trying to fit new pieces into a house that is already full. The work now is different. It is not to build, it is to release. For all of this to leave the realm of ideas and enter actual life, the doctrine has to be translated into practice. Eckhart did this, though in a scattered way, in a work known as the Talks of Instruction, written when he was prior in Erfurt. There he advised young monks, but what he said applies to any man at any time. There are 3 practices that can be distilled from those talks and offered to the viewer. The first is the daily examination of attachments. Before sleep, in silence, no phone, no television. Ask yourself, what did I carry today that I could have let go? It might be a flash of irritation in traffic. It might be a sharp reply you wanted to give and held back. It might be a worry about something that has not yet happened. It might be a piece of gossip you took in, even knowing you should not have. This examination is not aimed at producing guilt. It is aimed at producing awareness. And awareness, on its own, already begins to release. The second practice is voluntary silence. Set aside 1 hour a day, just one, with no screens, no voices, no music, just presence. It can be a walk without earbuds. It can be sitting on the porch looking at the sky. It can be tending the garden without thinking about anything else. Eckhart would not ask for silence in order to empty the mind. He would ask for silence in order to let the spark show itself. At first, that silence is uncomfortable. The mind protests. It thinks of 1,000 things. It wants to grab the phone. But if the person stays with it, day after day, something begins to shift. The pressure of the noise eases. The ground of the soul begins to breathe. And little by little, silence stops being absence and becomes presence. A dense, full presence, which was what had been missing the whole time. The third practice is to act without why in one single simple task each day. It might be making breakfast with full attention, without checking the phone at the same time. It might be listening to someone without planning your response. It might be doing a piece of work well that no one is going to see. It might be helping someone and not telling anyone afterward. Eckhart would suggest that these small actions, repeated with consistency, change something deep. They train the soul to act from itself and not from the imaginary audience. Over time, that way of acting spreads. It starts in one task, but spills into the whole of life. And when it spills into the whole of life, the person notices, with some astonishment, that he no longer needs to put on a show, that his presence by itself is already enough. Small gestures, deep effects. These practices do not require a spiritual retreat or a radical change of life. They require only what Eckhart called inner seriousness. Seriousness in the sense of taking your own ground seriously, of stopping living on appearances, even the appearances we present to ourselves. The man who begins this work discovers, after a few weeks, that something is shifting. He sleeps better. He reacts less. He feels more. He finds pleasure in small things that once seemed insignificant. The morning cup of coffee gains presence. A hug from a child gains weight. An ordinary walk starts to feel like a small gift. The light from the open refrigerator in the middle of the night, once just functional, starts to have something almost intimate about it. It is not magic. It is just what happens when you remove the coverings that had been muffling the original light the whole time. It was heavy, and he did not know. There is a final detail that has to be said now, and it is what this whole path has been leading to. Eckhart's path is not a path to becoming someone else. It is not a project of self-improvement. It is something subtler and more radical. It is a path of return, of going back to being who you were before all the things that covered you, before the family pressure to be a certain way, before the school that told you what counted and what did not, before the career that demanded a mask, before the successes that asked for another mask and the failures that asked for yet another. The greatness Eckhart promises is not new. It is old, older than you, and that is why it is stable. Because it was never achieved. It was always there. And here, finally, we can answer the question this whole path has been trying to answer. How does detachment lead to greatness? The answer is simpler than it seems. And because it is simple, it is easy to miss. Detachment leads to greatness because greatness was never being built. It was being buried. Each attachment was a layer of dirt over what you already were. Each certainty, each title, each mask, each delayed expectation, each held resentment was sediment over the original light. Detachment does not invent anything. Detachment only removes. And when it removes, what was always underneath, intact, whole, prior to everything, finally breathes. That is what appears. Not an improved version of you. You. What you were before all the coverings. That is why detachment does not lead you to greatness, as if greatness were somewhere else. Detachment is the gesture by which greatness, which was always there, stops being muffled. To let go is to discover. To discover is to remember. And to remember, in this case, is to return to being whole. To the viewer who has made it this far, one last thing is worth remembering. You have already lived a great deal, and you have probably tried many ways to become great. Some worked in part, others disappointed completely. What Eckhart offers is not one more attempt. It is the opposite. It is the invitation to stop trying, to sit, finally, in the depths of yourself, and discover that there, beneath all the life you have lived, there is a light that never went out, that waited, that is still waiting, and that all it needs now, in the second half of life, is to be discovered. The second half of life is not the end of a road. It is the beginning of the most important one. It is the road back home, to the ember that was always there, even when you forgot it. If this video made sense to you, leave your comment below.